So some of you may have intellectual role models or academics or, public figures who are publishers and journalists and media contributors and so on and so forth who you look up to because they provide keen insight and wisdom into some of the world's greatest challenges, particularly as they pertain to social problems. For me, one of these kind of intellectual legends is Noam Chomsky, the famed Massachusetts Institute and Technology professor who has long been a critic of U.S. foreign policy, of the role that corporations have in U.S. foreign policy. And I respect him because he provides dissent. He provides unpopular opinions that we often do not hear about in mainstream media. So recently, Al Jazeera published an article that had some insight from Professor Chomsky, in which he said the coronavirus could have been prevented because there was more than enough information available to the world at the time. And even Chomsky himself noted in October 2019, just before the outbreak, that there was actually a large-scale simulation in the United States that was designed to prepare this country for an outbreak like the COVID-19 pandemic.
These epidemic events are getting more and more disruptive to health and to economy. And the reason we called it Event 201 is we knew eventually one of these days, one of those events would be the big one. And that big one would really challenge our capacity to respond. And to respond to the big one, we do need to have all hands on deck. Participants are confronted by a hypothetical scenario that presents to them the challenges of a response. So we will say, here's a hypothetical disease outbreak. This is the way it might be evolving. And these are some of the challenges that you'll see that you'll have to address to address the disruptions that you're seeing to your healthcare system or to your organization. All stakeholders realize pretty quickly just how underprepared we are and just how much is possible when we work together. And that the individual actions of any government or company won't add up to a proper global response. I think if we're honest with ourselves, collectively, the international community has never done enough to respond to global health security challenges. That we knew before COVID that the world was underprepared for biological risk. When we walked into the room in New York, if you would have asked, do you think the world is prepared for a pandemic? I think everyone around that table would have said no. But it's when they walked out, I think it's when we really knew that if we are going to get ready, we need to have operationalized and integrated public-private cooperation that we haven't seen before.
Professor Chomsky, however, warned that once the pandemic is over, There are two critical challenges that still remain with us. And these challenges are one, the prospect of a nuclear war, and two, climate change and environmental catastrophe. Today, we're going to focus on the first, that of nuclear war. So as Professor Chomsky noted, while the coronavirus obviously can have terrifying consequences, he correctly noted that there will be a recovery. But then he turns to nuclear war. Can the human race survive nuclear war? Will there be a recovery, or will human civilization be finished once and for all? Is Professor Chomsky right? Is nuclear war, or the prospect of it, more dangerous than the coronavirus? The UK government in 2019 issued a report that concluded that a lack of meaningful arms control agreements is risking the creation of an arms race and raising the possibility of nuclear weapons being used on our planet. That UK government report also pointed to disintegrating relationships and new technologies, which means that the risk of a nuclear war today is as high as it's been since the height of the Cold War. So we're talking 30, 40 years here. And think about this. What would happen if a nuclear war actually broke out? Certainly it would be more serious than what we're witnessing today, right? The Nuclear Threat Initiative, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization founded in 2001 and based in Washington, D.C., offers an image. The center of a nuclear blast would be hotter than the surface of the sun. Tornado-strength winds would spread the flames. At least 1 million people or more would die. Survivors would have no electricity, no transportation, no phones, and hospitals would be overwhelmed if they were indeed still even standing. Today, we have many countries with nuclear weapons: China, India, Israel, France, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Put together, these countries have enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet 100 times over. Now, some of you might be thinking, and perhaps correctly so, that this idea of a nuclear war it's dramatized, it's unlikely to happen, that world governments aren't stupid enough to actually engage in nuclear war because it would mean mutually assured destruction. So if the US drops one on Russia, Russia drops one back, both countries are wiped out. What does anyone gain from that? Yet, many stories have been published in recent years. One by Democracy Now! Just a few months ago in February 2020, which raised the increasing prospect of a nuclear war. The Federation of American Scientists revealed in late January that the U.S. Navy had deployed for the first time a submarine armed with a low-yield Trident nuclear warhead. The USS Tennessee deployed from Kings Bay Submarine Base in Georgia in late 2019. That was the ship actually carrying the warhead. This particular warhead is estimated to have about a third of the explosive power of the atomic bomb the US dropped on Hiroshima. The international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons called the news, quote, an alarming development that heightens the risk of nuclear war. And there are other recent policy changes that raise some concern, as Foreign Policy in Focus recently pointed out. In May 2018, the Trump administration unilaterally withdrew from the laboriously constructed Iran nuclear agreement that had closed off the possibility of Iran developing nuclear weapons. The U.S. pullout was followed by the imposition of heavy U.S. economic sanctions on Iran, as well as by thinly veiled threats by Trump to use nuclear weapons to destroy this country. Irate at these moves, the Iranian government recently retaliated by exceeding the limits set by the shattered agreement on its uranium stockpile and uranium enrichment. At the beginning of February 2019, the Trump administration announced that in August, the U.S. government would withdraw from the Reagan-era Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was a historic agreement that had banned U.S. and Russia ground-launched cruise missiles and would proceed to develop such weapons. On the following day, guess what happened? Russian President Vladimir Putin declared that, in response, his government was suspending its observance of the treaty and would build the kinds of nuclear missiles that the treaty mentioned had outlawed. According to these two reports, the idea of a global nuclear war is not far-fetched. And not to downplay the significance of the coronavirus, which we're all really aware of, it really does make you wonder, why don't we talk more about nuclear war? Why don't we talk about the proliferation of nuclear weapons? Why don't we talk about what the aftermath of a global nuclear war would look like? So you have some questions to think about. How do you think a nuclear war would transform our society and our planet, especially in comparison to the coronavirus and how that has changed our society and our planet? Number two, do you think the media in the United States and around the world does an adequate job of covering this hot topic of nuclear war and the prospect of it, as well as the proliferation of nuclear weapons and the ending of these anti-nuclear war agreements between major political powers? And third, do you think the prospect of a nuclear war should be one of the main topics in the 2020 presidential election? Let me know what you think about these three questions. As always, feel free to leave answers in the comments section below. You could also ping me in a direct message, in a private message, whatever works best for you. Take care, stay safe, and stay sane.